My name is Arthur Vance, and I've learned that the hardest thing in the world isn't building something that lasts. It's watching it be forgotten. I was 16 when we put up the old Harmony Creek schoolhouse brick by brick. My hands mixed the mortar that holds those walls together. My shoulders helped raise the beams that still hold up the roof. We weren't just building a school back then. We were building a promise to our children that they would have more than we did, that their world would be bigger than our small town. For 70 years, that building kept its promise. I thought that was enough. I thought the work spoke for itself. But I was wrong. Work doesn't speak. People do. And for too long, I've been silent. Now they're bringing in the wrecking ball to make way for a parking lot, and the silence is so loud it feels like a betrayal. It feels like my betrayal. That was the summer of 1952. Most boys my age were thinking about girls or cars, but our town was thinking about the future. We didn't have much, not in terms of money, but we had each other. Every Saturday, farmers, shopkeepers, and men who worked at the mill would show up with their tools and their sons. I remember the smell of fresh-cut pine and the scratch of wet cement on my skin. It was hard work, the kind that leaves your muscles aching for days. But no one ever complained, because when you looked around, you saw your neighbors, all sweating and straining for the same reason. We weren't paid for it. Our payment was the idea that one day the sound of children learning would fill those halls. We believed we were creating something permanent, something that would outlive us all. We were planting a tree, and we never imagined a day would come when someone would see it not as a source of shade, but as an inconvenience. Back then, the world was still catching its breath after the war. We'd heard stories of big cities rebuilding, of new highways connecting everything. But here in Harmony Creek, our world was small. Our future was a damp, single room in the church basement where 20 children tried to learn under one flickering bulb. It smelled of mildew and old hymnals. We knew if we wanted more for them, no one was coming to give it to us. We had to build it ourselves, so we did. Every Saturday, my father would wake me before dawn, and we'd join the other men. No one asked for pay. No one kept a clock. There was just the work and the shared understanding that we were laying a foundation not just of concrete, but of opportunity. I was just a boy, but they put a shovel in my hands and treated me like a man, because the job was too important for anyone to be considered small. That's a feeling a person doesn't forget. The air that summer was thick with the smell of cut lumber and sweat. It was a good smell, an honest smell. I can still feel the grit of the mortar under my fingernails, how it would dry and crack my skin by the end of the day. I remember the rhythmic sound of a dozen hammers hitting nails, all slightly out of sync but creating a kind of music. It was the sound of progress. Mr. Abernathy, who ran the hardware store, was our unofficial foreman. A quiet man with hands as tough as old leather. He never raised his voice. He'd just show you how to hold the saw right, how to check if a wall was plumb. He taught us that doing something right, even if it took longer, was a form of respect for the materials, for the other men, and for the children who would one day walk those halls. We weren't just putting up a building. We were learning how to be a community one 2x4 at a time. There was one afternoon, I'll never forget it. We had to hoist the main roof beam into place. It was a massive piece of oak, and it took 8 of us, 4 on each end, straining with everything we had. My muscles screamed. I could feel the man next to me trembling from the effort. For a long moment, the whole world was just the weight of that beam and the grunts of the men beside me. We guided it up, slowly, carefully, until it was poised right above the main support walls. A complete silence fell over the whole site. No hammers, no saws. Just 8 men holding their breath, holding the future of that building in their hands. And then, with a soft, solid thud, it settled perfectly into place. A collective sigh went through us. Nobody cheered. We just looked at each other and nodded. In that quiet moment, we knew. We knew we had built something that would stand. We thought it would stand forever. But the memory that haunts me most isn't one of noise and sweat. It's one of silence. We had just finished the interior framing on the first classroom. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the empty window openings, and the air was thick with the smell of fresh pine and the coming cool of the evening. Most of the men had already packed up, their shoulders slumped with a full day's labor. But a few of us stayed behind with Mr. Abernathy. He walked in from his truck carrying this massive slate chalkboard, framed in dark, heavy oak. He held it like it was a sacred tablet. We all just stopped. Until that moment, we were building a box, a shelter. But that chalkboard, that was the first piece of the school. It was the heart. He didn't say a word, just motioned for me and another boy to help him lift it against the main wall. It felt impossibly heavy, its surface cool and dark under my straining fingers. Mr. Abernathy was a meticulous man, a carpenter who believed a crooked line was a kind of sin. He pulled out his level, his chalk line, and spent what felt like an eternity making tiny, precise marks on the fresh plasterboard. He was determined to get it perfect. We watched him, a small audience in the dusty twilight, our tired bodies leaning against the unfinished walls. Finally, he drilled the holes, set the heavy bolts, and with a final collective grunt, we hoisted it into place. He stepped back, wiping his brow with the back of a dusty hand, a small, proud smile on his face. A moment of perfect silence. Then one of the younger boys, squinting in the dim light, said quietly, "Mr. Abernathy, I think it's a little crooked." And he was right. It was off by maybe half an inch, but it was there. The perfection was broken. Mr. Abernathy stared at it, then at the boy, and then he let out this deep, tired, rumbling laugh. And suddenly we were all laughing, not at him, but with him, with the beautiful imperfection of it all. When the laughter died down, a different kind of quiet settled over us. I walked up to that slightly crooked chalkboard and put my hand flat against it. The slate was cold and impossibly smooth. It was a perfect, silent void, waiting for chalk, waiting for questions, waiting for answers I'd never get to learn. And it hit me, right there in my chest, a feeling so sharp and clear. I was building this for children I would never meet. My own formal schooling was long over. My future was the dirt on my father's farm. I was helping to build a door to a world I would never enter myself. I wasn't the student. I was just the man who helped hang the door. And in that quiet moment, I felt a kind of profound, beautiful sadness. The kind of ache you feel when you create something you have to let go of. We made a promise that night, hanging that imperfect board on that wall. A promise I eventually broke with my own silence. For years I saw it happening. A broken window here, peeling paint there. I'd drive by and see the weeds creeping up the steps. And I'd tell myself, Arthur, you're old. You did your part. It's someone else's turn now. But that was a lie. A comfortable lie, I told myself, so I wouldn't have to feel the shame. The truth is, I was tired and proud. 5 years ago at the town meeting, they talked about the first budget cuts. I was sitting right there in the back row, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew every loose floorboard in that building. I knew the story of every brick. But I didn't stand up. I didn't walk to that microphone. I just sat there, invisible, and let my silence become an answer. I let them think nobody cared anymore. And in that moment, the boy who mixed the mortar died a little. I betrayed him. Now the wrecking ball is coming. And what I'm afraid of, it's not just losing a building. I'm afraid that when it falls, the only proof that I ever did something that mattered will fall with it. All that sweat, all that hope we poured into the foundation, does it just turn to dust? My grandson Leo, he looks at that old school and just sees an obsolete building. He doesn't see the promise. He doesn't see Mr. Abernathy's crooked chalkboard. He just sees a problem to be solved with demolition. And I worry he looks at me the same way. An old man, a relic from a time that's over. I fear that my whole life will be just a story about a man who built something that couldn't last, and then was too quiet to even explain why he'd bothered to build it in the first place. That's a terrible legacy, to be forgotten. The quiet is what gets to me the most. When they finally locked the doors for good a few years back, the silence that fell over that building, it was the same silence that filled this house after my Eleanor passed. One day there's life, there's noise, there's purpose. The sound of children in the schoolyard, the sound of Eleanor humming in the kitchen. And then there's nothing, just the echo. I walk through these empty rooms and I drive past those empty classrooms and it feels the same. I'm just a witness to the decay. A caretaker of ghosts. I think that's why I didn't speak up, because fighting for that school felt like trying to bring Eleanor back. It felt impossible. It hurt too much to look at something so full of life and admit that its heart had stopped beating, just like mine felt like it had. But it was my own grandson Leo who drove the final nail in. He came over last Tuesday, found me staring out the window at the old school, and he put a hand on my shoulder. He's a good boy, smart as a whip. He said, "Grandpa, I know it means a lot to you, but you have to be realistic. It's an obsolete building. The world's different now." He held up his phone. "My whole education is right here. I can learn anything I want from anywhere in the world." I know he wasn't trying to be cruel. He was just being practical. But every word felt like a shovelful of dirt on a coffin. He sees the future as something you download. We saw it as something you had to build with your own 2 hands, right here where you stood. He doesn't see the promise in those bricks. He just sees an inefficient structure taking up space. And it makes me wonder if that's how he sees me too. An old, inefficient man taking up space. That's the difference, you see. It's not just the building, it's the way we think. Back then, if a neighbor's barn burned down, 10 men would be there the next morning with hammers. No questions asked. It wasn't a transaction, it was a reflex. It was just what you did because you knew, deep in your bones, that your neighbor's problem was also your problem. Now we just call the insurance company. We've outsourced our sense of duty. People walk by that old school with its boarded up windows and they shake their heads. They say, "It's a shame," and then they keep walking. They're waiting for someone else, the council, a committee, a wealthy donor, to fix it. We never waited. We were the ones we were waiting for. We didn't have much money, but we had a sense of ownership that was richer than any bank account. That's what we've lost. Not a building, but the feeling that we are all responsible for it. And this new silence, this town-wide shrug, it's a mirror. It shows me my own reflection from that town meeting 5 years ago. I see my own tired resignation in my neighbors' eyes. I hear my own silence in their quiet complaints over coffee at the diner. We've all become spectators in our own town. We watch things happen. We comment on them. But we don't believe we can change them. We act like the story is already written. Back in '52, we knew nothing was written. We were holding the pen, the hammer, the shovel. We believed our sweat could change the future. Now we just hope the future is kind. The worst part is, I can't even be angry with them. I can't be angry with Leo, because for 10 years I was one of them. I let my own story gather dust, and now I'm surprised that no one else wants to read it. I let the silence win. So last week I went out to the old shed. I hadn't opened my father's toolbox in years. The hinges groaned. And there it was, his hammer. The handle worn smooth and dark from his sweat and mine. I picked it up, and the weight of it felt real, purposeful. I looked through the shed door and saw Leo in the living room, his face lit by the blue glow of his phone, scrolling through a world I don't understand. And it hit me. My real failure wasn't letting the school fall down. My failure was that my own grandson could look at this hammer and see only a piece of old steel and wood. I never told him its story. I never told him that this hammer didn't just build a roof, it built a promise. So I made a decision, not to chain myself to the gates, not to shout at a meeting. My decision was smaller and harder. I was going to take him to that school and tell him everything, especially the part about my own cowardly silence. And I did. The next day we walked through those empty halls. The dust motes danced in the light from the boarded windows. I told him everything, about the smell of pine, about Mr. Abernathy's crooked chalkboard, and the deep burning shame I felt sitting in that meeting, saying nothing. He just listened. When I finished, the silence in that classroom felt different. It wasn't empty, it was full. He was quiet all the way home. Then, that weekend, he came back with a camera. He started recording me, asking me to point to the exact spot where the beam went up. He's talking to other old-timers now, putting our voices together. And I finally understood. The building might still fall. The wrecking ball might still win that fight. But a legacy isn't made of brick and mortar. It's a story. And the most important work isn't just building something. It's having the courage to pass down the reason why. So now I look at you. and I have to wonder, what's your schoolhouse? What's that place in your town, that tradition in your family that is slowly fading away while everyone just watches? Maybe it's an old recipe nobody makes anymore, or a park bench where your parents first met. We all have them. We build these beautiful, important things in our lives, and we think the work is done. We think their value is obvious, but it's not. Nothing speaks for itself. And when we stop speaking for the things we love, we give our permission for them to disappear. My silence was a kind of rust, eating away at the foundation I'd been so proud of. I spent years watching the decay, thinking my time to care had passed. But our responsibility to remember, to honor what we've built, that never gets old. It's the only work that's never truly finished. So please, don't make my mistake. Don't wait for the wrecking ball. Here's what you do. You find that one thing, and then you find one person, someone younger who wasn't there, and you take them to it. Or you just sit them down, and you tell them the story. Not the grand, heroic version. Tell them about the day it rained, or the part that went wrong, or why your hands still ache when you think about it. Tell them why you cared enough to build it in the first place. You don't have to win a fight. You just have to pass the story on. My grandson and I, we may not save the school, but we saved its soul, and we rebuilt a bridge between his world and mine. A legacy isn't built from brick and mortar. It's built from memory, passed from one generation to the next. That's the only thing that truly lasts.